do this, but two combinations made me do it. Still, Mary Uduma and I come from way back. Mary was my senior in Deloitte and Touche Akintola Williams, and you know the way that you look at young women and they look at women that are older than themselves in profession, in the world of work. So as a young person training to be a chartered accountant, and she was a senior, she was one of those women that my generation looked up to in Deloitte and Touche. I want to publicly acknowledge that when you have strong women as a young woman, there is a tendency for you to try to accomplish even more. And so Mary, I celebrate you this morning because in some way, you and many of the women I knew at that time created the pathway for the rest of us to imagine that we could do great things. So please help me to celebrate Mary. And I know how steadfast she's been in staying within this community of ICT and telecommunication more broadly. I also had to come because there's a certain gentleman who has been a needler of my life since he was ever introduced to me by my husband. His name is Segun Olubile. I can't get rid of that gentleman. You know, every time he has one. Oh, Segun, you walked in right at. Who is Segun? This is Segun, yes. You know, I mean, I was just talking about you, how much of a needler you are. You needle me to death, Segun. And in order to get rid of you, I have to do what you want me to do. And often it is something that is well worthy of the growth of our society. So please help me to acknowledge Segun. So these two combination of people made it impossible for me to be able to come back and plead ill health because of the kind of cold that I'm down with. But whatever happens, I'll try to make something of this discussion on the role of the internet as an enabler of good governance. I think that the theme of this forum is really spot on, and I congratulate your forum, the Nigeria Internet Governance Forum, for the great work that you've done in the years that you've been in existence. Let me acknowledge the Minister of Telecommunication, of ICT, Ms. Barrister Shitu. Mr. Minister, I don't normally clap for ministers when they come late to events. That's why I didn't clap when you came in. Because one of the things that we learned how to do is to try to get the rest of society to make time a function of productivity. So in my little way, I show my sanction. So, but it is a delight that you ultimately made it to this event. So we want to acknowledge the minister for his presence. Ladies and gentlemen, some of you are mumbling them. Are you sabi? Ladies and gentlemen, this topic, internet as an enabler of good governance, as I said, is very important topic for us to focus on because it is a topic that we should have been discussing decades ago, not even now. The countries that are ahead of us talked about these decades ago. I start by saying, what is the raison d'etre of government? The French would say raison d'etre. What's the purpose? What's the leitmotif of government? Government exists to improve the quality of life of citizens and to ensure their safety and security. Governments are the instrumentality through which countries use the combination of sound policies, strong and dynamic institutions, effective and efficient investments to promote growth and development. And as growth and development happen, societies become stable and prosperous. The prosperity of societies then further drive more growth and more stability. Because as society grows, the citizens grow. As the citizens grow, you create a basis for social cohesion. You begin to level the access to opportunities for people. That process of leveling opportunities for people creates a sense of stake in society. That sense of stake in society drives a further optimization of all that people can do in their society. All of these intro for me would be important in order for us to understand that this topic is not simply a topic that involves those of you who have been in the field of technology, ICT, and the rest of it. It is not a narrow subject that we're discussing. We're discussing a field that has become even more important in the advancement of society than it ever was. Ladies and gentlemen, knowledge is the basis of progress of society. Research shows that to us. The different revolutions in the history of humanity have been a function of the level of knowledge that was available at the time of those revolutions. And so we got the agricultural revolution. A new knowledge came into the ecosystem of humanity. The agricultural revolution, I told you, I already apologized. So when you hear some sound, pretend you didn't hear it. Thank you. So, can I get some water? Thank you so much. Room temperature would be good. Thank you. I'm really sorry. The alternative would have been for me to have excused myself from this. So you would have to bear with me. Do you bear with me? Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you. So the agricultural revolution enabled man to get, humanity to get to the level of knowledge where tools of production to improve agricultural yield and productivity came into existence. And then we moved on to a new level of knowledge, industrial revolution, where capital formation enabled the industrialization process. And do you know what is amazing about those two revolutions? They went over the head of our continent and our country. So we were neither participants in the agricultural revolution, nor were we participants in industrial revolution. But the third revolution came. And that revolution is the one that those of us who are in this hall probably participated in one form or the other, and now participate very much in the ICT revolution. That revolution is the one that is prevalent, and the one that when you talk to children above the age, maybe below the age of 10, they probably know no other life other than ICT revolution. Are we together? Because that's the world they were born into. The ICT revolution became the revolution that the continent of Africa participated in. But its participation in it has been really a strong participation in the consumption of the products of the revolution more than as producer, co-producer with the rest of the world. And while we were still talking about ICT revolution, another revolution comes, and it's called the second machine age, the fourth industrial revolution. all of these revolutions are anchored on level of knowledge available to society to be able to use that level of knowledge to conquer the earth, to dominate the earth, to solve the problems of humanity, circumscribed within certain jurisdictions and territories. And so if you conquered a certain level of knowledge and solved your own problems with that knowledge, you grew, you developed, you became prosperous, you became more stable. Stability and the absence of conflict of the kind that we find in societies that are fragile states dealing with the challenges of development is because people don't have much to lose when they fight. Hardly would you go on the streets of Oxford in London and see two English men or two English women take off their clothes and begin to fight. Why would they fight? They have too much to lose in doing that, because society has enabled them to grow. They've become prosperous. Their certain needs, basic needs are met. And so there is a functional state, meaning that there is government that at least enables the process of a stable society by making equality of opportunity the way of life. Now, that word, equality of opportunities, is key and central to the role that the internet has played for humanity. For there is no greater leveler than the internet. Am I correct? Now, the problem though is that equality of access to the internet remains a problem. And so we have challenges of achieving digital inclusion. How many of you have grandmothers that know about the internet? All right, let me see the liars amongst you. Reverend, why are you laughing? Are you going to give them penance when they lie? That must be why the Reverend is laughing so hard. You know? But you know what that is? It means that we haven't achieved inclusion, because some of you, even your mothers, they wonder what it is that you're always doing on your phone. Why can't I even just get your attention? And then some of the young ones would say to their mothers, this phone is my office. And they look at them with such shock. How can the phone be your office? Digital inclusion remains a problem. Digital inclusion remains a problem not on the basis of age, but on the basis of poverty. So we lack that digital inclusion. But all things considered, there are many in the society that would have no access to certain kind of knowledge without the internet. So the internet became a leveler of access to knowledge. The second thing to point out in that regard is that the major thing that the internet after all does is that it is a network of networks. Am I correct? It is basically about myriads of networks of computers and users somehow connected and having social interaction, having economic interaction, having political interaction, having all forms and manners of levels of interaction that are both horizontal and vertical. Both horizontal and vertical. And these interactions have always formed the basis of the advancement of society. So here we are with the fourth industrial revolution, or the second machine age, and this is a revolution that happened so rapidly on the back of the ICT revolution. While Africa was immediately beginning to not just consume, but beginning to do an adaptation of what was available to it in order to make those things uniquely able to solve our own unique problems and challenges. So for example, innovations began to come out of Africa in the use of the tools of ICT. suddenly the world realized that mobile telephony is a solution to Africa's serious infrastructure challenge in fixed line as a means of communication. And that leap enabled us to look at it much more than merely a tool of conversation. It became a tool to solve many of our problems. So we began to solve the problem that economics call asymmetry of information, where the buyer and the seller are not at equal level of knowledge. So the mobile telephony helped us to deal with a serious economic issue, because the one who has more access to quality information is more advantaged over the other. And so suddenly efficiency became an important part of the internet and what it offers to our own continent and our country. Then we began to see that the internet could enable us just do our transactions, especially our banking transactions well. When I was at the World Bank as VP in charge of the Africa region, it meant that I was VP, that I had 47 clients, 47 countries of sub-Saharan Africa as my clients. And Kenya was just amazing when it came to ICT. It had a fantastic permanent secretary for ICT at that time. And this permanent secretary was ahead of his colleagues around the continent. And so it was not surprising that Kenya pursued innovation. And before you knew it, Kenya provided what we call the mobile money, the M-Pesa. The M-Pesa came into existence. So commerce grew as a result of internet and access to it in Kenya. The next thing, the civil society of Kenya took hold of the internet and used it as a basis to begin to hold the government to levels of transparency and to data sharing, which ended up becoming a part of the ecosystem of the political process in Kenya, the Ushahidi. How many of you know about it? Pardon? Yes, you do. You do know about it? Yes. You know, so you could see how the internet began to change traditional systems in a country like Kenya. Now, that having been said, we're in the 4th Industrial Revolution. For the 4th Industrial Revolution, we are in a world where we're talking about the robotics, the Internet of Things, data, big data, simulation science, blockchain technologies. We're just talking about a world that is entirely different from the world even as you currently walk within it. Those who know. Those who know that the world has again shifted its structure of production of values. We are falling behind. We're falling behind. To the extent that the 4th Industrial Revolution is the best opportunity that our continent has to not be a consumer, but to be a producer of this new level of knowledge. Do you understand? Because the other revolutions just crossed us. The 2. The 3rd one, we've participated. The 4th one is a space where we should be at the table at the same time with everybody. So what that means is that when you gather to discuss the internet as an enabler of good governance, the key conversation that you must have is, how interested is your community in good governance? How interested is your community in good governance? And what exactly do we mean when we talk about good governance? Ladies and gentlemen, when governments govern, one groundbreaking knowledge that we have is that when governments govern, if there is no good governance, it is impossible to develop. So when people sort of think that, we can be managing and one day we will get there. How many times have you heard Nigerians say that? Well, let me tell you something that is very simple. And this was a friend of mine who was Deputy Secretary of State for America. He said, Obi, nothing happens that is not made to happen. So development cannot happen until it is made to happen. And this research has told us that development cannot happen without good governance. It means that very distinguished community like yours, when you put up a topic like internet as an enabler of good governance, you must first say to yourself, what is good governance? What are the features of good governance? And how then does the tool, the tool which we are most connected to as the players in this sector, how then does it push? How does the tool of the internet enable that good governance? That's what we're here to do. All the panels you're going to be having will be focused on that. So in laying a framework for the conversation, let me just say that good governance is the process of decision making and the process by which decisions are implemented or not implemented. Governance can be defined as what happens at a corporate level, at an international level, at a national or local level, and it's often something that can be used to define interaction between and among sectors in any society. Over time, the term good governance emerged within the international development circle to describe what happens in the way that institutions of the public, because institutions of the public are different from private institutions. Every society has public problems and private problems. If some of you here say you have a problem to solve, and we all say, what is your problem to solve? You say, my problem to solve is to get married. And you say, and you get up here and say to the Minister of Communication, how is it that you have not made it possible for me to get married? All of us would look at you and say, is he okay? That's a private problem. It's not a public problem, right? But society has public problems. When society has public problems, it needs public agency and institutions as a way of solving it. The way that those processes interact can determine whether you have good governance or not. So what are the features of good governance? Some of the features of good governance that we know are, number one, good governance is accountable. Good governance is accountable, and accountability is actually seen as the cornerstone of good governance. Every government, its entities, the personnel that run them, having an obligation to report, to explain, and to be answerable for the consequences of decisions that it made on the behalf of the rest. Good governance. Without there being accountability, you can have good governance. So whenever you see governments that are angry when they are asked to account for how they have used the power that was legitimately conferred on them by the rest of the people, you know that there is a danger. There's a danger ahead. There's a problem. Accountability is the cornerstone of good governance. The maxim that those who have given you power are entitled as your employers to your report on how you have used delegated authority is the key basis for knowing that we cannot get good governance without accountability. Another feature of good governance is transparency. Good governance is transparent. People should be able to follow and understand the decision-making processes that happen on their behalf. This means that they will be able to clearly see how and why a decision was made. Because the man who is making a decision as to who he will marry, does it concern me? Even if the man were my son, all that I know to do now as a sensible mother is to only quietly be saying certain things. Because there's a way I can say certain things about his choice of wife. He will now be determined to marry her. That's a private issue. It's his issue. But when it is a public issue, I must have a voice in how that decision is being made. Do you agree with me, Nigerians? Because part of the problem that we've had in our society is that Nigerians do not think that they are entitled to transparency. They think it is it is a nice, what do you call it? What do you call that thing? No, it's not. I'm saying that it is a thing. That's the word. That had to come from a woman. You know? So they think that when they are transparent, they have done the society a favor. No, Nigerians, transparency is sine qua non for good governance, just like accountability. So transparency, as we came to learn more and more about it, when as a young professionals, I was one of the co-founders of Transparency International globally, what we learned about transparency is that it is the antidote to corrupt conduct. That transparency is about shining the light on how people have determined the outcome that affects the larger number. Are you following so far, ladies and gentlemen? So this means that through transparency, we're able to see clearly how decisions were made. We're able to have access to information, the advice and consultation necessary to make the decisions that affect the larger number in a way that is impactful on them, positively impactful on them. Good governance follows the rule of law. The rule of law is basically the maxim that says to us that there must be a consistency in the way that governance is offered with the provisions of the law, legislation, the constitution. The rule of law says you cannot act in a way that is capricious. You just wake up and you decide that this is what you do, you just do it. No, there is legal context, constitutional context. And the maxim is that the rule of law says all men, all women are equal before the law. Nobody is treated with a sense of superiority over any other. And that is why I love something that a young woman that has become so dear to my heart, Aisha Yusufu, she says, no Nigerian is more Nigerian than any other. That's the rule of law. Everybody before the law is considered to be equal. So equality before the law is a feature of good governance. When you see those who govern break the law in the terrible mistake that because they govern, they are superior before the law, it means that good governance is not happening. I love when Nigerians understand this, because part of what weakens good governance is for citizens to feel disempowered. Ladies and gentlemen, a few more items on good governance, and I will do the summary and you would have your day. Good governance is responsive. It is responsive in the sense that good governance, that the responsiveness requires that the government and its entities should always try to serve the needs of the entire community while balancing out competing interess in a timely, appropriate, and responsive manner. It is responsive. So for example, Nigerians have been screaming about the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, SARS. Surely, it is time for a government which is responsive according to the features, the characteristics of good governance, to pay more than a passing attention to that outcry. Are you understanding what I'm saying? Good governance would mean that nobody in government would have a knee-jerk reaction and say, there is no problem. What would they say? If so many voices are complaining about the same entity in government, we must investigate thoroughly and in an independent way to identify what the problems may be so that we can solve it. That's good governance. That's good governance. It is responsive. I hope that the citizens who have been calling on the government on the end SARS or reform SARS or do something about SARS or overhaul the police will be able to hear the government respond to the cry. That is good governance. Good governance is effective and efficient. Government should implement decisions and follow processes that make the best use of available people, resources, and time in order to ensure the best possible results for their community. Effective and efficient. Good governance is the basis. This effective and efficient use of resources is why a country that has not earned anything close to the trillion of dollars that Nigeria would have earned from oil alone has been able to grow a more stable and more prosperous society. It's because of the absence of that capacity to use human capital, use financial resources, use technical resources efficiently and effectively that we stay less than we should be. Good governance is participatory, and this is the heartbeat of your internet. The greatest tool of participation has been the internet. In my world, when we were growing up, our friends from across the rest of the world had to wait to get a pen pal letter. I'm sure this minister must have been one of those that wrote pen pal letters, because, you know, that was the generation. We wanted to have friends in any part of the world. What did you do? You just looked at a magazine. You saw them saying they're looking for friends from Africa, and that you will now write to them. And then our NIPOST was really bad then. I hear that today. I know that NIPOST is doing much better. Give them a round of applause. You know, NIPOST is trying to hold its own in some of the things that it is doing, and I'm proud of that work. But in our time, it was those pen pal letters, and some of those letters never got to the people we sent them to. But today, the generation that the Benga Shesans and the ones that they are raising, like the four that he asked to get up for a recognition earlier, they don't know anything other than social networks that crisscross all boundaries. Is that not so? It doesn't matter if they may be in the most rural of areas of Nigeria, but they have a conversation with somebody in Washington or in Kuala Lumpur or in India, wherever it may be. So they are so they call them, is it netizens you call them? Is that what you call them? Yes, they are netizens. They are not held back by the artificial boundaries of walls that define the territorial integrity of nations. Now, do you know what that does? That feature of participation basically means that you can crowdsource solutions to problems. This power of the internet to enable good governance therefore means that our children are not going to be like us. They are not going to be comfortable with low quality governance, because they have seen through the eyes of those they interact with around the world that good governance is possible. So they set a higher standard of what it means to be governed well. Is that a positive? It is a positive. It is a positive. Because, by the way, governance, and there I begin to round up, governance is like a market. Governance is like a market of any product. If you looked at governance as a product, it means that it has suppliers and those who demand. Am I correct? Any product or service is like that. You must have those who supply and those who demand. Governance as a product means that those who govern are who? Those that govern are who? They are suppliers. I like to get an interaction with my audience. So don't sit in class and just keep quiet. So I will ask again. Governance is provided by who? The suppliers. Those who supply are different from those who demand. Who are those that demand? The citizens. Whether they be citizens in terms of individuals or communities, or they be citizens in terms of corporate entities in business, right? So there's a demand side and there's a supply side. Now the issue in governance is this. In societies that did not get a mastery of the democratic process, or societies like our own where the democratic process kept being truncated, there was never a strong formation of the demand side of governance. So what happened was that the supply side, that is government, became very strong and began to dominate the entire space of society. And so the supply side matured while the demand side was like in a state of immaturity. And what happens in a market is that if the supplier has greater power, isn't it? If the supplier is dominant and the demand side is disempowered, what happens? The market that I've described is sort of a monopoly market. What do we know about monopoly? Monopoly has no incentive for quality. It does not give you quality pricing. It does not give you quality product. The monopolist is dominant, therefore they have no incentive for efficiency. The monopolist has no incentive to involve your voice and your participation. So what do? They dominate. So the supply side of governance has dominated our society. That's why if you dare to open your mouth to talk, even the list of the members of the supply side of governance will look at you as a citizen and say, are you okay? Do you know who you are talking to? Why? Because that was their platform. Nobody else on the demand side was supposed to have a voice. So what do you see happens in a market of governance that looks like this? You must find a means of disrupting it. The internet has come to disrupt the monopoly that the supply side had over governance. The internet has come to do so. And so the main issue is going to be getting the citizens to a place of information literacy. Repeat after me. Information literacy. Because naturally, the internet would provide them a gamut, an overload of information. But is it every information that is going to be helpful in empowering the citizens to know exactly how equivalency of power they can exercise on the supply side? No, it's not. So, just getting the citizens to a place of, you have a right to know. You not only have a right to know, you have a voice to demand, and that you have the power to determine the quality of governance that is given to you. And therefore, we need to get you to a place of information literacy. There are different players in your space. The problem with your space is that you're so commercially oriented. All of you are looking for who is going to outsmart the other through making plenty of money in ICT. I am here to bust your bubble. It doesn't matter how much you make through ICT. If you're living in a society that is poorly governed, you're a poor person. So the greatest thing that your forum can do for this society is to now rise in stature and to be the ones that will take this tool of a leveler of the power inequality that exists between the demand side and the supply side and equilibrate it. Is that a worthy venture to pursue? Because if a man who built his country up says to us that without quality governance, it is impossible for a country to develop. I am paraphrasing the quote of Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore. If you said that, then you must know that there is something there. Because after all, Singapore and ourselves started at almost the same level in the 60s. After having gained independence from Great Britain, Singapore has gone on to now have a GDP per capita for each individual in that society of about $60,000. We have managed to create a GDP per capita of about $2,317. Do you see the disparity? That disparity is the definition of good governance. And if you're gathered to look at the internet, which is an equalizer, as a means of improving the capacity of the demand side, which was fragmented, which was weakened, which was disparate, and you now see that through this tool, you can create the basis for wider participation, engagement, voice, demand for accountability, then you guys really can define how quickly we get to good governance. May God bless you.